Hey guys, today we're going to talk a little bit about, we'll call them display animals. So, in the reptile hobby, we'll say that there's basically kind of two kinds of reptiles that people go for. The first is, the more pet type of animals, the ones that you're getting out of the enclosure, handling, and interacting with all the time. And then the other one is more of a display animal where you make the big display, the big bioactive or naturalistic or whatever setup, and you just kind of enjoy it because of the natural beauty of the animal itself. And so that's obviously why I don't have one out right now, because we're talking about more of like a display type of animal. And in this video, I'm going to talk about 5 different species that make great reptile display animals where they're not really like out and about handling because it can be stressful for them, and that can cause them to react negatively, which for a reptile, that's basically the only defense mechanism that they have, is by biting you, which is stressful to them. They can lose teeth. It's a whole thing. So animals that work best when it comes to just being displayed and appreciated for really what they were versus like a corn snake or a ball python. So the first species is a pretty famous, pretty classic one, and that is the chameleon. These guys are probably the ones that are most willing to be out and about and handled. We've seen them all around, but a lot of chameleons in and of themselves don't like to be messed with. They like to, they'll huff up, they'll hiss, they'll puff, they'll change colors, and everything that they're really famous for. So these guys make, just in general, really good display animals, where once you create like a really nice, heavy planted, lots of branches and climbing stuff for them to be in there, you can just kind of sit and just enjoy them, even just moving around with their cute little grabby hands and their little eyes, and then feeding them off tongs is just really cool. So that's a really good display species. I think a lot of times they get really popular because they like them and they're really famous, but they're not really a great beginner reptile in general, and they're really best appreciated, just kind of, you get a lot of fulfillment and enrichment setting up their habitats, and this goes for all of them in general, where that's a really good interaction you have, is taking the time to set up the actual cages or boxes or whatever the heck you're going to put them in, to where that they can get the most from that, and you can sit there and enjoy them in all of their natural beauty, in the closest thing that we can make to their natural environment, which is really, really cool. The next one is our boreal snakes. So these guys are very, very famous. They're getting more and more popular, and there's quite a few species of them. Green tree pythons, Amazon tree boas, the emerald tree boas, and I don't necessarily really want to get into this, but a lot of like the palm vipers and stuff like that, if you're in a place where you're legally allowed to keep those. But I'm not going to talk about those. So it's mostly about, the green tree pythons or GTPs, Amazon tree boas, ATBs, and then the emerald boas. Those guys are very famous. They're very pretty. Arguably some of just the prettiest looking snakes there are, period. There aren't a whole lot of morphs when it comes to them as far as actual genes and stuff like you see in ball pythons. There's some variations in color which makes them really cool, but just them in and of themselves are amazingly beautiful animals. The reason why that they're best left to just display purposes is that they are known, and with right, are very defensive, striking animals. A lot of that, and they usually have very large teeth. That's because they live up in the trees, and a lot of the food that they eat is fast-moving birds and lizards and stuff like that. To where if it's going by super fast, they need to be able to grab it and not have it let go. So that's why we've all seen that picture of that emerald tree boa with its mouth open. They have some of the largest teeth of any non-venomous reptile there are. The rough-scale pythons have really long ones, and Dumeral's boas too, but like the GTPs and the emerald tree boas, those things have very large teeth, which if getting hit by those, you're going to feel it, and it doesn't feel great. You can rip the teeth out, stresses the animals like we said about before. So that's an animal that you can put a lot of energy into making a great environment for them, and you can just sit them, you can just look at them, even just sitting on a branch, you can just stare at them and see just how amazing they are, which is why they're really great for more of a display reptile. The next one is day geckos. So day geckos are a very easy lizard to keep, but they don't make a really great handleable pet because they are super fast and they are very quick to drop their tails as well. We have 2 species here. We have the giant day gecko, which is super famous of the Geico commercial, and then we have a peacock day gecko. Both of them are pretty small, though the giant day geckos, they get, probably about like that or so full grown. But a lot of the other day geckos, they stay really small. They need full spectrum lighting. They are diurnal. They eat kind of pretty much whatever you give them, but the little fruit powders work really well. So if you're keeping crested geckos, they work very similar to that. But they really aren't great for being handled. They're flighty, they're fast, they move, and a lot of times if they get out, it's going to be a really hard time getting them back. So spending the time to build a really cool enclosure, which is why these things get really cool, where they thrive really well in heavily planted habitats. But because they're diurnal, you'll see them out and about moving, unlike a lot of other reptile species where they're nocturnal, you won't see them moving a whole lot. So even if you have a big 24 by 18 by 18 enclosure and it's filled with bromeliads and logs or even artificial plants or whatever it may have you, they're up when we're up, so you're going to see them moving around, which is really cool. And that's why I think day geckos, while they are an easy to keep species, not great for handling like a crested gecko or a leopard gecko, but they're still really, really pretty. The next species is very similar to that, and that's the anoles. Everybody's seen them. They're a lot of people's first reptile, at least kind of, back in the day. Like if you're in Florida, they're everywhere, brown and green anoles. People just have them for feeder lizards these days. But they do make pretty good pets because they're actually really cool to sit there and watch. If you have a large enclosure with them and you have quite a few of them because they can live fairly communally, it's really cool to watch their behavior. Like males, they sit there and they will, essentially fight over territory, and males, not aggressively, but, they do their head bobbing and they'll flare their big, a lot of them have really brightly colored dewlaps, which is that kind of flappy skin right there that they'll flare up. And you can sit there and just watching them are really cool to see that. And so if you have, a very large enclosure that's filled with lots of, it doesn't have to be bioactive necessarily, but, a very naturalistic thing with lots of plants and logs and hides and stuff like that, and you have quite a few of them in there, just watching your behavior is really cool. So that's why, anoles, a lot of people, they probably didn't keep them as well as they should have back in the day. But if you do it right, like you would for like a day gecko or something else where you give them UVB and full spectrum lighting and, the room like a lot of lizards really need, they're really cool to see. And so that's why I think anoles are a little bit underappreciated when it comes to kind of reptiles these days. But having like a big, like if you have like a 75-gallon tank and you have like 5 or 6 anoles in there, it'd be super cool to just kind of sit there and watch them do their thing. And I think that'd be really cool. And I've seen some enclosures like that in the day, out and about, like going to zoos and just like other different places like that. So I think that's really cool. And anoles kind of get overlooked, but they're really good species to just have as a display. The last one that I'm going to talk about isn't a reptile. It's an amphibian. Dart frogs. Dart frogs are probably the most iconic display animal you can get, especially when it comes to like bioactive naturalistic setups, because they essentially have to be kept in a bioactive setup really just to thrive or to even live, to be honest. They're super brightly colored, they're diurnal, they're always moving around, they're really, really cool. Because they don't get really big, you don't need a whole lot of room, so a lot of people will keep multiple species, and it's really cool to see all their little behaviors. The thing about dart frogs, like all amphibians, is they have that porous skin, so they'll absorb oils, which can be harmful to them. I know what a lot of you guys are thinking, dart frogs, those are the poison arrow dart frogs, but as probably a lot of you guys know, who if you actually watch this channel, they actually get their poison from poisonous ants and insects they eat out in their natural habitat. Even wild-caught animals, once they bring them in, after a few months when their diet changes, they're no longer poisonous. There are some frogs that are very similar to dart frogs that are found in like Madagascar and stuff who will still retain a little bit of poison. But we're not going to talk about them. This is just kind of mostly about, the New World dart frogs, although the setup is basically the same. But you don't want to handle those because they can really stress out and it can be really harmful for them. But just having a dart frog, it's kind of like, I wouldn't say the Everest of it, but like if you're keeping dart frogs successfully, you're doing something right. You have your stuff out and it's just so cool to see dart frogs. If you go to a zoo or reptile store, wherever you go, when you see dart frogs, it's always hard not to just kind of sit there and stare at them for a while just because they're so cool to look at, but you don't want to handle them. And so that's kind of the same thing with all of the animals that we talked about in this video, is that they're really, really cool to see, but not great to handle. Hopefully you guys liked it. It gave you some ideas. You enjoyed it a little bit. Now, maybe I didn't go too much into detail about them, but hopefully you still enjoyed it. Maybe I'll do a little bit more key stuff down the road. Please like and subscribe if you can. If you had any follow-up questions or anything like that, let me know down in the comments. Hit me on Facebook, Instagram. You know where to find me, jzsreptiles. Hope you guys had a good day, and I'll check you next time.